Subversive Equality by Richard M. Weaver. The most insidious idea employed to break down society is an undefined equalitarianism. That this concept does not make sense, even in the most elementary applications, has proved no deterrent to its spread, and we shall have something to say later about modern man's growing incapacity for logic. An American political writer of the last century, confronted with the statement that all men are created free and equal, asked whether it would not be more accurate to say that no man was ever created free and no two men ever created equal. Such hard-headedness would today be mistaken for frivolity. Thomas Jefferson, after his long apostleship to radicalism, made it the labor of his old age to create an educational system which would be a means of sorting out according to gifts and attainments. Such equalitarianism is harmful because it always presents itself as a redress of injustice, whereas, in truth, it is the very opposite. I would mention here the fact, obvious to any candid observer, that equality is found most often in the mouths of those engaged in artful self-promotion. These secretly cherish the latter to high designs, but find that they can mount the lower rungs more easily by making use of the catchword. We do not necessarily grudge them their rise, but the concept they foster is fatal to the harmony of the world. The comity of peoples in groups, large or small, rests not upon this chimerical notion of equality, but upon fraternity, a concept which long antedates it in history because it goes immeasurably deeper in human sentiment. The ancient feeling of brotherhood carries obligations, of which equality knows nothing. It calls for respect and protection. For brotherhood is status in family, and family is by nature hierarchical. It demands patience with little brother, and it may sternly exact duty of big brother. It places people in a network of sentiment, not of rights, that hortus siccus of modern vainglory. It is eloquent that loss of respect for logic, to which we owe so many disasters, that the French Revolution made equality and fraternity coordinates. In so doing, it offered a foretaste of the contemporary political campaign, which shamelessly promises everything. Equality is a disorganizing concept insofar as human relationships mean order. It is order without a design. It attempts a meaningless and profitless regimentation of what has been ordered from time immemorial by the scheme of things. No society can rightly offer less than equality before the law, but there can be no equality of condition between youth and age or between the sexes. There cannot be equality even among friends. The rule is that each shall act where he is strong. The assignment of identical roles produces first confusion and then alienation, as we have increasing opportunity to observe. Not only is this disorganizing heresy busily confounding the most natural social groupings, it is also creating a reservoir of poisonous envy. How much of the frustrations of the modern world proceeds from starting with the assumption that all are equal, finding that this cannot be so, and then having to realize that one can no longer fall back on the bond of fraternity. However paradoxical it may seem, fraternity has existed in the most hierarchical organizations. It exists, as we have just noted, in that archetype of hierarchy, the family. The essence of cooperation is congeniality, the feeling of having been born together. Fraternity directs attention to others, equality to self, and the passion for equality is simultaneous with the growth of egotism. The frame of duty which fraternity erects is itself the source of ideal conduct. When men feel that society means station, the highest and the lowest see their endeavors contributing to a common end, and they are in harmony rather than in competition. It will be found, as a general rule, that those parts of the world which have talked least of equality have, in the solid fact of their social life, exhibited the greatest fraternity. Such was true of feudal Europe before people succumbed to various forms of the proposal that every man should be king. Nothing is more manifest than that as this social distance has diminished and all groups have moved nearer equality, suspicion and hostility have increased. In the present world, there is little of trust and less of loyalty. People do not know what to expect of one another. Leaders will not lead, and servants will not serve. It is a matter of common observation, too, that people meet most easily when they know their position. If their work and authority are defined, they can proceed on fixed assumptions and conduct themselves without embarrassment toward inferior and superior. When the rule of equality obtains, however, no one knows where he belongs. Because he has been assured that he is just as good as anybody else, he is likely to suspect that he is getting less than his deserts. Shakespeare concluded his wonderful discourse on degree with reference to an envious fever. And when Mark Twain, in the role of Connecticut Yankee, undertook to destroy the hierarchy of Camelot, he was furious to find that serfs and others of the lower order were not resentful of their condition. He adopted then the typical Jacobin procedure of instilling hatred of all superiority. Resentment, as Richard Hertz has made plain, may well prove the dynamite which will finally wreck Western society. The basis of an organic social order is fraternity, uniting parts that are distinct. We must repeat, then, with reference to our first principles, that rebellion against distinction is an aspect of that worldwide and centuries-long movement against knowledge, whose beginning goes back to nominalism. For it requires only a slight transference to say that, if our classifications of the world of physical nature are arbitrary, so too are those of human society. In other words, after we grant that those generalizations about the world, which we necessarily make, and this is a necessity no one can really deny, do not express an objective order but only afford convenient modes, the same must be granted about society. With this conceded, inherent pattern is gone. Nothing is justified that does not serve convenience, and there remains no court of appeal against subversion by pragmatism. Thus, repudiation of knowledge of what is destroys the basis of renewal. It is not fantastic, but rather realistic, to see as the ultimate result of this process the end of civilization. It is generally assumed that the erasing of all distinctions will usher in the reign of pure democracy. But the inability of pure democracy to stand for something intelligible leaves it merely a verbal deception. If it promises equality before the law, it does no more than empires and monarchies have done, and cannot use this as a ground to assert superiority. If it promises equality of condition, it promises injustice, because one law for the ox and the lion is tyranny. Pressure from the consumer instinct usually compels it to promise the latter. When it was found that equality before the law has no effect on inequalities of ability and achievement, humanitarians concluded that they had been tricked into asking only part of their just claim. The claim to political equality was then supplemented by the demand for economic democracy, which was to give substance to the ideal of the levelers. Nothing but a despotism could enforce anything so unrealistic, and this explains why modern governments dedicated to this program have become, under one guise and another, despotic. There are other aspects to the dilemma of radical egalitarianism. A defense often employed by the more sophisticated is that democratic equality allows each to develop his potentialities. This plausible argument involves grave questions about the nature of things. It is here implied that man is like a seed, having some imminent design of germination, so that for his flowering he needs that liberty which is freedom from. If this is the whole account, it can only mean that our determination is naturalistic and that our growth is merely the unfolding of a plan established merely by nature. One need hardly add that this conception accepts orientation from below and assumes that man's destiny is to be natural, to develop like a plant. This makes impossible any thought of discipline, which would, under these circumstances, be a force constraining what nature had intended. But all teleology rejects freedom from in favor of freedom to. That men are a field of wild flowers, naturally good in their growing, is a romantic fallacy. A kindred notion is that democracy means opportunity for advancement, or, in the language of the day, a chance to be a success. Obviously, this contention presumes hierarchy. The sort of advancement contemplated by these advocates is just the kind that requires a condition of high social organization, with rewards, degrees, and everything that comes with the frank recognition of superiority. If democracy means a chance to get ahead, it means a chance to rise above the less worthy, to have station with reference to points above and below. The solution of this dilemma is that these people wish democracy not as an end, but as a means. Confronted with the realities described, the Democrat may confess that his democracy is only a correction for a distorted aristocracy. He does want order, but he wants the kind in which the best, the gifted and the industrious, get ahead. There must be a fence, but the wrong rail is on top. Notwithstanding this claim that democracy is quicker to recognize native worth, every visitor to a democratic society has been struck by its jealous demand for conformity. Such spirit is an outgrowth of competition and suspicion. The Democrats well sense that, if they allow people to divide according to abilities and preferences, soon structure will impose itself upon the mass. Hence the adulation of the regular fellow, the political seduction of the common man, and the deep distrust of intellectuals, whose grasp of principle gives them superior insight. This society may even pay tribute to the exemplar of easy morals, for he is the good fellow who has about him none of the uncomfortable angularities of the idealist. It seems plain that the Democrats are ignoring a contradiction. Had they the courage to be logical, they would do as their predecessors in ancient Greece and choose their governors by lot. An election is, after all, a highly undemocratic proceeding. The very term means discrimination. How is it possible to choose the best man when, by definition, there is no best? If a society wishes to be its natural self, that is to say, if it wishes to flourish wild, unshaped by anything superior to itself, it should make a perfectly random choice of administrators. Let youth and age, wisdom and folly, courage and cowardice, self-control and dissoluteness sit together on the bench. This will be representative. This is a cross-section, and there seems no room to question that it would create that society filled with wonderful variety and disorder, which Plato called democracy.